This lesson will cover subtracting mixed numbers. This is part 3 of 3. Let's review our rules for adding and subtracting fractions. In step 1, we will find the least common denominator, or LCD, which means we will find multiples of each denominator until we reach our first match. In step 2, we will make equivalent fractions by using the LCD. We will follow the golden rule of math, which means that whatever we do to the denominator, we will also do to the numerator. You can review these steps in part 1 and part 2 of adding and subtracting fractions and mixed numbers. Let's take a look at a real-world scenario. Zachary jogged 3 7/10 miles after school on Monday. His sister Savannah ran 2 1/4 miles after school. How much farther did Zachary run than Savannah? Based on our keywords, we are going to subtract 2 1/4 from 3 7/10. We'll start by finding our LCD. The multiples of 10 are 10 and 20. Reminder, we could keep going, but we want to find our first match to be more efficient. Our multiples of 4 are 4, 8, 12, 16, 20. Our first match is 20, so that means our LCD is 20. Another reminder that when we find equivalent fractions, we are only making the fractions equivalent. Our whole numbers will stay the exact same. So our new denominator is 20, and now we're going to make an equivalent fraction for 7/10. We want to determine which multiple of 10 helped us to reach 20. Looking at our list below, it is our second multiple. 10 times 2 is 20. We will multiply our numerator by 2 as well. 7 times 2 is 14. 3 7/10 is equivalent to 3 14/20. Now we'll take a look at 2 1/4. We want to know which multiple of 4 helped us to reach 20. Looking at our list below, our fifth multiple of 4 helped us to reach 20, so we will multiply our numerator by 5 as well. 1 times 5 is 5. So our equivalent fraction for 2 1/4 is 2 5/20. Now we are ready to subtract. Reminder, when we add or subtract mixed numbers, we want to start with the same denominator. Because we found our LCD, we're going to keep the same denominator. We will subtract our numerators. 14 minus 5 will give us 9. And then we will subtract our whole numbers. 3 minus 2 will give us 1. 1 9/20 miles farther. Let's take a look at another scenario. Kayla needs 5 1/2 cups of sugar to make her favorite icing. She needed 2 3/4 cups of sugar to make her favorite cake. How much more sugar did she need for the icing than for the cake? Based on our keywords, we will subtract 2 3/4 from 5 1/2. We will find our LCD. We'll list the multiples of 2 and 4 until we get our first match. The multiples of 2, 2, 4. The multiples of 4, just 4. So our LCD will be 4. And reminder that our whole numbers will stay the same and our new denominator will be 4. For our first mixed number, 5 1/2, we see that 2 times 2 would give us 4, which means we will multiply our numerator by 2. 1 times 2 will give us 2. So 5 1/2 is equivalent to 5 2/4. Now we're going to take a look at 2 3/4. This mixed number is kind of unique because it already has the denominator that we needed, which means we only used our first multiple. 4 times 1 is 4, so we'll multiply 3 times 1, which is 3. In this case, 2 3/4 will stay the same, and it is equivalent to 2 3/4. Now we are ready to subtract. However, when we look at our subtraction, reminder that we're supposed to subtract our fractions first because it is a smaller place value than our whole numbers. We notice that we cannot take 3/4 away from 2/4, which means we will need to regroup. However, regrouping with mixed numbers is different than regrouping with whole numbers. But let's take a look. We will regroup from our 5, and our 5 will become a 4. However, when we regroup, we do not lose any value. So we will still have the 5, it will just be readjusted. So right now we have 4, which means we will need an additional 1. That 1 will come in the form of a fraction. Because our denominator is 4 and we want it to equal 1 whole, we can say 4/4. 4/4 is equivalent to 1 whole. And again, 4 plus our 1 whole still equals 5. We're not losing any value, we are just readjusting our value. So now that we have regrouped our 5, we are now making sure that we also add in our 2/4. So our 4 plus our 1, which we readjusted to 4/4, will also add our 2/4, will end up giving us 4 6/4. And I know that may look a little bit different, but the value is still the same. So we have readjusted 5 2/4. We regrouped our 5 and made it a 4 plus 1. Our 1 became a fraction 4/4, and we also included our 2/4 to have 4 6/4. Now we are ready to subtract because we do not need to change our second mixed number. So in subtracting here, we will keep the same denominator of 4. We will subtract our numerators, 6 and 3, and that will give us 3. And we can also now subtract our whole numbers, which will give us 2. We can say that 2 3/4 more cups of sugar for the icing was used. We'll look at one more scenario with subtracting mixed numbers that also requires regrouping so that we can get an even better understanding. Joseph bought 5 yards of blue fabric for his superhero costume. He will use 3 5/8 yards for the cape. How much more fabric will he have left for his hat? Based on our keywords, we are going to subtract 3 5/8 from 5. If you notice, 5 is a whole number and it does not have a fraction part, so it's going to be a little bit difficult to subtract here unless we give it a fraction. And we want to find our LCD, but we want to make that as easy as possible. Because we have a denominator here in 3 5/8, we can just automatically give 5 the denominator of 8, and there's no need to search or find multiples for any numbers. We will just use the denominator that's already given to us because 5 was a whole number that didn't come with the fraction. Now we want to take a look at what numerator can we give without changing the value of 5. And the only number that we can place as the numerator without changing the value is 0. 5 0/8 is equal to just the number 5. So again, we gave it the denominator of the mixed number that we already had, and we gave it a numerator of 0 so that we would not change its value of 5. Now we are ready to subtract. However, we cannot take 5/8 away from 0/8, so we must regroup. In regrouping, we will regroup from our 5. Our 5 will become a 4. However, we're not changing the value, we are just readjusting the value. So we can say in order to equal our 5, we will need to do 4 plus 1. And our 1 will need to come in the form of a fraction. And because our denominator is 8, we can say that 8/8 is equal to 1. So we still have our value of 5, it's just readjusted so that we will be able to subtract. Now that we have successfully regrouped our 5, we can add in our 0/8. And even though it won't change the value, we would still recognize that there is a fraction there that could be added. Putting these all together will give us 4 8/8. And now we are ready to subtract because the value is the same. 4 8/8 is equal to 5. We are now ready to subtract 3 5/8. And reminder that our denominator will stay the same. We can subtract our numerators. 8 minus 5 will give us 3. And our whole numbers, 4 minus 3, will give us 1. We can say 1 3/8 more yards of fabric. Reminder to subscribe to the Math in Motion channel on YouTube. For more in-depth lessons, please visit our Patreon page. And for online tutoring pricing, please email us at kpmathinmotion@gmail.com. Have a great day.